For me, by growing food really and by being a physical therapist, I really started to make the connection between food and health. And then actually seeing the effects of food in terms of causing type 2 diabetes and hypertension, obesity, then I started saying, you know what, there is definitely a connection between food and health. And why aren't people in the healthcare profession talking about that? Why is the treatment always medication or surgery instead of sitting down with the patient and asking, what are you eating? So I got an inside view of the problems that were plaguing the people in my neighborhood because I was inside the home and I saw the barriers. I saw the difficulty in terms of transportation. I saw the difficulty because of limited income. I saw the difficulty because there was limited access to healthy food. So I saw that firsthand because I worked in the trenches and I saw that. So I grew up in New York City, been here all my life. Grew up in the Lower East Side first, Jacob Riis houses, 10th Street and Avenue D, and then from there, my family in 1968, we moved to Harlem, Esplanade Gardens, and in 1985, I moved here to the Bronx. Well, I graduated from high school when I was 16. Growing up, I always wanted to be a scientist or a doctor. And so I really wanted to go to be a doctor. And I attended Fordham University pre-med program. But then I fell in love, got married, had children. After having a conversation, believe it or not, with a cousin of mine who had said that he wanted to go into physical therapy. So I said, oh, such a good idea. Let me look into it. So I looked into it and I applied, and they take only 40 students out of the hundreds that apply, and I got accepted. I loved my field. I did it for 37 and a half years. The function of a physical therapist is to restore function. And for me, I had to expand that, so it wasn't for me just to come in and do an evaluation and set up a program of exercise and function. It was like, what were the other things that was contributing to their disease or affect? And so what I would do is I would go into my patients and do my assessment, but then I also would ask questions like, okay, I need to see a list of your medication, and also, what are you eating? So let's go into the kitchen. Let's open up the refrigerator. Let's open up the cabinets. And so I had this rapport with my patients because majority of my patients had type 2 diabetes, were hypertensive, were obese. And so I sort of educated them. I said, I can't come and give you therapy if you're not taking care of yourself in terms of your diet. It doesn't work that way. Then we started having that rapport. And then I said, so look at the food that you're eating. Look at the cookies and candy and stuff that you're eating. And look at the processed food and the canned food. We used to cook that stuff. Now you're getting it in a can or you're getting it packaged. And so then having that conversation, all of a sudden they said, Ms. Washington, you're right. So it wasn't until I moved to the Bronx in 1985 and had a big backyard, and I decided I had three options: either to cement it, put a lawn on it, or to grow food. And I decided that I wanted to grow food. So I go into the library and get some books on how to grow vegetables. And I decided to grow four things. I decided to grow collard greens because I wanted to have that relationship to a staple that was always found in the African American culture. Tomatoes, because I hated tomatoes, eggplant, and green pepper. Strawberries. So you have raised beds here. First of all, once I started, growing my food and starting seeing this plant that grew on a vine, because my relationship to a tomato was that it happened in the supermarket. I mean, all our food, your relationship is, it's in the supermarket. You never ask yourself who grew it, how it's grown. You don't ask those questions because it's already done for you. I wanted to grow everything. I mean, everything tastes so much better. And right then and there, I knew that I had to do something, that I wanted to start growing my own food. So in 2008, I went to California to study organic farming. And this program, which is absolutely excellent, still exists now. It's called CASFIS, the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food System in Santa Cruz, California. I learned so wealth of information that I absorbed. But we would go once a week, would take trips to look at various farms, and I didn't see farmers that looked like me. But yet, all along my travels and learning experience, I was always hearing about a sustainable food system. A sustainable food system that's supposed to be just. And then where was the justice when the people that looked like me weren't part of the conversation, but looked at as part of the problem? And looking at the farm workers who are people of color, it just got me to thinking about, well, where is the place for my people? Where are my people's voice in this food system? And so came back on fire. I co-founded La Familia Verde, which is our community garden coalition, back in 1998 as a result of Giuliani trying to auction off community gardens. And so it first started with getting people to register to vote. It was an era of complacency. A lot of people didn't want to vote because they figured, oh, their vote doesn't matter. So changing that mindset, and then also bringing in accountability, getting people the idea that you have to make people who you vote accountable. Being in the garden and looking at some of the intersections that were happening along just growing food, some of the social issues that were happening within my community garden. At that time, crack cocaine was really high and prevalent, so you had to deal with police issues, crime issues. We had overcrowding schools. We had landlords who did not provide heat and hot water. So a lot of these social issues were part of the food movement for me because there's such intersection. So the Garden of Happiness was won over 1,000 vacant lots in New York City back in the late 1970s and 80s when the city was undergoing a fiscal crisis, where there was white flight. And so these lots became full of garbage, debris, you name it. Because in the beginning, the community garden movement the emphasis wasn't about food. It's about reclamation in terms of turning something beautiful. So it was about planting trees and shrubs and flowers and bulbs, so that now when people came by and looked at your neighborhood, it's totally different because it was beautiful. All of a sudden, developers started to look at neighborhoods different. And so now even developers will say, move into this area because there's a garden. They call it community gardens for a reason, and they become the mainstay. They become the anchor for community to have a voice, for community to gather together and talk about the issues that's in that community, to people to understand where their food comes from, to be energized and organized into politics and voting. And so if change is going to happen, change has to come from within communities, and that change has to come locally. I think the youth of today is so creative and they have the tools at their disposal, but they need a chance. They need a chance so that they can change that creativity into a viable business, and I think that's important as well. Here in New York City, you need at least 10 people. Then you need location, location, location. If you come upon a vacant lot, and number one, you find out that who owns it. So you find a vacant lot, you find out who owns it. Is it a private owned? Is it a business? Is it the city? Now, if it's a private owned or business, you need to talk to the landlord. If it's city owned and there's no immediate plans for development, city organization called Green Thumb that would investigate, and if it's viable, that means it's the city at this particular point in time has no need for development, and you got 10 people, they will help you turn that lot into a community garden. They will give you fencing, they will give you soil, they will give you lumber, they will give you seeds, because you'll have a hydrant, access to water, and the rest is, yeah, 10 members, come up with some bylaws. Okay. Yeah, so here we are in the Garden of Happiness. We call it the Garden of Happiness because when you come in, you're going to be happy. When you're going to be, and when you leave, you'll be happier. And so this garden is celebrating its 30th year. We have over 30 plots. Each plot is managed by a family member or a member. And yeah, we've been doing this for 30 years. We just got this new high tunnel to help us start early in the season. And so we have chickens in the back here, chicken coop. And so yeah, this is where I got started, here in the Garden of Happiness. So in New York City, what we try to do, the message that we try to tell people is to make sure that your local politicians know your community garden. So when we have events, every year we have a block party where we close down the street between 181st and 182nd Street. The homeowners, the apartment dwellers, the community garden, we set out tables and tents, and everybody feeds each other. So the community gardeners, we all cook and we give out food to everybody. Coming down, up and down the block, they get free food, and it's a way to give back to the community support. Able to speak to my friends about putting on a conference that would address some of the issues plaguing the Black American community when it came to food and agriculture. And I got a lot of resistance at first, a lot of resistance from people who I thought could understand what I was asking, but I went to the wrong people because I went to white people. And I was starting, I want to do this conference that really talks about the contribution of African Americans in the food system. And I was met with, Black people, they don't want to farm, all they want to do is play sports, music, they're not interested. And for some folks, maybe they would have taken that and just turned their backs. But for me, I thought it was a wake-up call. That first conference in Brooklyn drew over 500 people. It got to the point where the fire department said, wait, there's a lot of people here. For me, it was the best thing that could happen for the food system, because now you have a sector of people who for so long has been relegated outside of the conversation around food, have been only given a part in the history of food in terms of slavery, that their voices, their contributions have not been heard or met, and the issues that plague their community have not been addressed. Now, to have a conference where you see Black farmers, Black leaders, Black teachers, Black statisticians, Black educators in a room talking about the issues in a way how we collectively can solve them, because I think for so long people tend to focus on the problem. We know what the problems are. We want to hear solutions. So having that conference whereby people are gathered together and they're hearing solutions, and they're hearing solutions from different sectors of the country. They're galvanizing this networking operation so that, someone is doing something in Detroit that affects something in Boston. Someone is doing something in Philly, and how collectively coming together to move the needle. I think that's important. If you were to tell me 10 years ago that young men and women of color would be interested in becoming farmers, I would say you're out of your mind. And now, through this conference, I've learned, and I'm very humbled by it, how so many young people have reached out to say thank you. So many young people who want to be farmers, so many people that want to be actively involved in their response to growing their own food, because I think for so long there's been such a detachment from our food system, from our food, from our land, Then now you have people that want to go back to the land. They want to own land. They want to make sure that the land that they have is kept within their family. I think owning land gives you power. Growing your own food gives you power. And I think this young generation is starting to understand that and no longer drinking the Kool-Aid. When you say food desert, you're not really getting at the social injustices behind. By using food apartheid, you bring in the elements of race, you bring in the elements of economics, you bring in the elements of demographics, and then you can start having a conversation about why in a country that's so rich that we have food insecurity. You know, why? That's the question we need to ask. Why is it that there's limited access to food? You know, why does it fall along racial lines? Why does it fall along economic lines? Why does it fall along demographic lines? This is what we need to be talking about. Because when you say food desert, you're not talking about it. I had to change my lens on how I looked at poor people. You know, because, you know, you hear poor people, you know, they need this. They have problems. And the bottom line is that I look at my community different. I look at my community as strong and resilient because we've had to make some things, and the things that are happening within our community without nothing, no resources. And so if you want to fix the problem, then you got to put in economic resources within the community. Plain and simple. It's easy solution. Easy solution to come into communities and set up training centers. Come in communities and teach about businesses. Come in communities and teach about investing. What does that look like? How to save, how to repair credit. Give people a chance to have a mortgage to buy a house. Own a business. Teach people that. Give them the resources so that they can have something of their own to own. It's not rocket science. It really isn't, you know, to end hunger and poverty and to see what, you know, marginalized communities need. And the thing about it is that if you know that there's income inequality, that there's racism, there's sexism, there's an inequality in our, you know, when they say the 1% get richer and the rest is, it's like, you know this. You know this is happening. How do you change it? Because I'm tired of people talking about the problem. I don't want to hear about the problems anymore. I want to talk about solutions. How do you make food that is healthy affordable for people? Forget about the words. Let's meet people where they are and not get caught up with the be a vegan, you know, organic, this Mediterranean diet, all this, because that's not what they care about. Let's find out what's available in the community that's healthy. You know, let's limit the amount of soda. Let's limit the amount of candy within the community that we live in. There are fruits and vegetables. We can start with that. We can start with drinking more water. Because if you just go in there and you just concentrate on food, you're missing the whole point. Food is the intersection. So why aren't they eating a healthy meal if there's other intersections that's causing the problem? And so for you to go into a home or you go into a community and say, you know what, you need to eat healthy food, this and this and this, without looking at the other social impacts that is happening around, then you're not doing your job. As a dietitian or a nutritionist, you're not doing your job, but you're just focusing on what people are not eating, because it's much more than that. You got to find out, are they living? Are they able to pay rent? You know, do they have a job? Are the kids able to go to school? You know, do they have heat and hot water? It's because all that is indicative of what the food system entails as well. I am very humble. I wouldn't even want to even think about the people that I have touched. I would say maybe I'm no 100. I mean, looking at the likes I get on my Facebook page and stuff like that, I would, say in the hundreds. Looking at the amount of people we have on our bugs page, in the thousands. And I think it's a trickle down effect, because if I make a difference in someone's life, then they in turn make a difference in another person's life, and they make a difference in another person's life. It just takes one person to come up to you and say, you've inspired me. I want to be a farmer. I tell this story about what happened last year when I was doing a panel, and this woman and her daughter was between 5 and 7. She comes running up because I was rushing to go speak at another event. She said, can I stop and take a picture with you and my daughter? So I said, sure. And so then she said, you know what my daughter said to me? She says when she grows up, she wants to be a farmer. And so the tears just started. I was so emotional, because nowhere in my wildest dreams could I ever imagine that a 7-year-old black woman child would say to her mom, Mom, when I grow up, I want to be a farmer. It went through me. I just collapsed in tears that I made such an impact on a little girl who saw herself in me. And how many little black and brown girls are out there that can look at me and see themselves in me, because there are not a lot of black female farmers. I was brought up looking at farming as slave mentality. You're doing a man's work. I never looked at it growing up, and never heard about it as being a profession that anyone would want to aspire to be or to become. And so for that little girl to dream that, I'll cherish that till the day I die. And that is why I do the work that I do, because that little girl saw herself in me. And she didn't hear about the slavery, and she didn't hear about, all the negativism behind it. She saw something positive to aspire to be. So Rise and Root Farm, we started back in 2014. There's 4 of us, Jane and Michaela Hage Hodge, Lori Clevenger, and myself. We all come from community garden background. We've been friends for years, thinking about our hopes and our dreams. I tell people, dream big, no one knows your dreams unless you put it out there. And we always thought about farming together. And so we went up and down the Hudson Valley looking for land. And land, very expensive. The closer you are to New York, very expensive. Sure enough, we found this place up in Chester, New York, that was was leasing land to farmers. More people of color in the food movement. More people have access to land who are people of color. I would like to see more women farmers that look like me, more black farmers. I would like to see more inclusion and diversity in the food movement that I don't see. I want to see different voices at the table. I want to see conferences that are more diverse. I want to see people in communities taking care of their own communities and not being displaced because of gentrification. Either it'll happen or we'll make our own way. That's the end of the story. Either it's going to happen or we'll just make our own way. It's so ironic when we talk about food and agriculture, no one brings up George Washington Carver as a role model. The Michael Polans, the Mark Bittmans, even Joel Salatin. Not that but the thing about it, what happened to George Washington Carver? No, that's never mentioned. But I mention it. I mention it, you know what I'm saying? I mention Fannie Lou Hamer. I mention these people that, for me, are role models for me, that don't get a chance to be celebrated. But I make sure that they're not forgotten.